Sweet. And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is June 16th, or Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue number 399 in the NPM RFC's repo. I'll copy and paste for everybody that just joined the meeting notes doc. Feel free to add yourselves as an attendee. And just a bit of housekeeping quickly. As is usual, these calls and all communication on the RFC's repo is covered by a code of conduct that we ask folks to please abide by. Synopsis there is please be respectful as folks are talking. Raise your hand if you'd like to jump in and we'll call on you. Yeah, just please be kind. As is normal, the desired outcomes of this call is to ideally move features forward and have a touch point with the community on features they'd like implemented. In terms of announcements this week, I don't think there's anything I had queued up. Does anybody else have any announcements? As usual, we're cutting releases weekly, so if you want to grab the latest NPM CLI, you can get in the normal ways. Please, try out V7, continue to give us feedback, and we're trying to stay on top of our issue backlog. So that's great. So moving on, we'll kick off things. Earlier in the week, our team identified the fact that there is still sort of a backlog of accepted and yet not implemented RFCs that we want to go through and essentially either withdraw or queue up in our backlog and to actually be executed on. So if folks are okay with it, I'm going to share my screen quickly and we can go through that list and sort of have a bit of discussion about what we actually want to potentially actually move forward with or withdraw in terms of execution here. So, okay, can folks see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome. So the first RFC that we want to look at got actually implemented or accepted about 3 years ago. This is the idea that we would implement something like an npm changelog. I would love to know folks' thoughts on this. If you've taken a look at this, Isaac, I think you were the only person around that might have had any insight into when this got backlogged. Is this something we want to still move forward with? I guess the question here is, yeah.
I would suggest we just remove it.
Yeah.
Withdraw it because we haven't implemented it. And we're not very likely to, and like that kind of stuff actually kind of belongs more at the Git repo level, I feel like, and that's happening. So yeah, I don't see this being a very high priority thing anytime soon.
And I think it would still be useful, right? It would like establish the convention in a firm way.
But I don't know how you can establish it any more firmly than
it's pretty firm.
It already is, right? Like,
I mean, there's a couple different file names that are used, and npm could pick one, and some things don't actually provide one, and but like the majority do use like changelog.md, and that's true.
I mean, if you do like changelog, just bare or changelog.star, it's that's usually the changelog file. We actually removed it at the request of users. We removed it from the always include list in npm pack list because they can get kind of long and you just never look at them. So why have them in your node modules tree?
So in this case, this would essentially remove the yeah, 002, or actually, if we want to take some notes here, I want to at least capture, and Roy, I'm not sure if you're taking notes here, but want to capture what we would define as the amendment. So in terms of withdrawing an RFC, I think we created sort of a template for why we are essentially amending, or we're saying that this is no longer useful. So just want to be mindful that we should queue that up either as an action item to write that and move it over, or we can decide right now the reason is because we don't think that this is useful anymore. Jordan, I see you say it's annoying to have to find them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel that strongly about it, right? Like if no one, and especially if no one's planning on implementing it, and I certainly don't have the time to do it. So like, maybe there's a difference between like maybe it would be useful to say this is an RFC that was accepted and is not going to be accepted in the future versus, or is like no longer accepted versus one that this is accepted, but like no one's going to work on it. Like if someone made the PR for this, would it be rejected?
I would want to push back pretty hard on it because it's like it's adding yet another command for a thing that I feel like shouldn't really be NPM's job. And it also sort of implies some potentially like, what if you fetch? Yeah, so the changelog file might not even be in the package artifact.
Could be your URL, right? Yeah. Okay.
I think that answers the question for me then.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are certainly some that, like, I'd probably accept an audit XML report, but I am not going to implement it myself. Like, if it's just a matter of taking the audit JSON that we have now and dumping it as XML, I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, if you need this, then sure, send a PR. But it's been several years and nobody's piped up. Like, since the initial report, nobody's come around and said that they would do it.
Exactly.
So I think we can withdraw it. I guess, you know, part of the meta conversation here maybe is like, accepted should really be like, it's kind of on our roadmap. Like, even if we don't have a specific date yet for when it's going to be shipped, it's a thing that we're sort of announcing an intent to build something if it's in accepted.
Yeah, so using these two as an example, then, like, I don't know if this is overkill, but like it seems like making a folder for one folder for the changelog one and a different one for the audit XML, where the changelog one is saying like,
no, this is
unaccepted,
withdrawn. Yeah,
right. And then the XML one goes in a like accepted, but like someone else has to build it, kind of. And like, well, we will never build it. But yes, exactly. Like, I wonder if that's a useful distinction to make.
I'm just wondering how we make that distinction. Like, is it two separate folders, like our backlog and like community backlog, or like as
I don't
you say,
think it's.
patch,
I think the
like,
folder level is too strong. Like, we're going to put a little note at the top of each of these. The note in audit XML report could just be like, hey, if you want to do this, we'll probably accept it, but like, we're not going to. So.
Right. And a similar note in the changelog one says that like, this will not be accepted even if you do it.
Yeah,
that seems totally fine
of the.
Okay. So that covers changelog and audit XML report on terms of update package JSON.
I think that's already what Arborist is doing now.
Yeah, I was reading this. It looks like this has been implemented.
Yeah, it was implemented because it was easier, not because of the RFC, as sometimes happens.
Right, if you can just take that note. Moving on, shallow updates.
This definitely needs review. If you do npm update some name, then we only touch the things by that name and any edges that are now invalid after the update. When you do npm update without any names, well, we throw away the entire current state of the tree, whether it's the actual tree or the package lock JSON, and just sort of build from first principles and then turn it into that. So shallow updates are like Well, no, it's not shallowly updating if you want to update everything. So I think this just kind of needs review, and then we'll probably be moved to implemented.
Okay. Moving on then, publish without tag.
Yes, we want this.
So keep this for now. No caret pre-release installs.
I want to push back on this one. I don't think that it's particularly useful. Like we have the sort of established semantics of Semver with pre-releases, and the caret already kind of handles the right state of like, oh, well, this is caret is like, give me the things that the author, according to their, understanding of Semver, does not think is a breaking change. And the way that we have the established semantics of pre-releases, where we only include the pre-releases in that major minor patch tuple, I think it's like what we have is fine. Again, this is one of these ones where like nobody has complained about us not having it, and it's a strictly client-side thing. So
So like what we want to do with this, we want to essentially withdraw this. So don't put a caret range for pre-release.
No, we continue to put a caret for pre-releases.
Right. So that's why I'm saying we won't implement this. Like we want to withdraw this.
Yeah, I would withdraw it and add in the note, like use save exact if that's what you want.
Yeah, okay. That makes total sense. Npm Link Changes.
Looking at that one now. No, remove this. This was kind of half implemented in NPM 5 and 6. But a lot of what this is trying to do is handled already in a better way by the new package lock formatting and the way that Arborist does it. So it's talking about an implementation that no longer exists.
So we'll withdraw the link changes and running as root. This was also implemented already, I think, based on what we talked about on Monday.
It looks like it, yeah.
The UID versus GID changes. Okay. So we can move that to implemented, and then published prompts. I think the rest of these have been more recently actually accepted. So I think it was just this first set that we really want to get.
Yeah, I thought this would be a more work to go through, actually.
I was hoping it was about 15 minutes worth of work, so awesome. Okay. Moving on then, if we can, unless folks had anything else they want to talk about.
Just to point out that I just made a pull request to remove the npm install link documentation from the config, yesterday.
Awesome.
So that was still in there.
Right, but it's not actually supported. And that eventually will be fixed soon when we have our docs being generated from the config itself, right, Gar? So
it's part of it. It already is, yeah. So
yeah.
I removed it from the config, and so all the docs are updated, and we publish our doc site will update.
Awesome, cool. So next up was actually, I wanted to check in quickly. get a bit of progress updates on some of the action items we had from last week. This is something that I think I'll do more going forward, especially because we're doing these calls weekly. So having like an ongoing list of action items just to check in and make sure that we're actually following up on those things, I think would be good. So last week we identified, unfortunately ZB couldn't make it, but gave a quick update in the issue itself for his items. He said specifically he's dug up and is looking at Arborist itself, and he's going to spend some time to actually create the PRs. Might be good if we can actually get somebody to pair with him based on time zones. It'd be nice to see if we can get somebody to actually work with him based on the fact that I know he wants to make some changes, add some information back into the audit JSON. So, and then Roy, if you want to give maybe a quick update, I'm not sure if you're going to get time this week, maybe to turn the npm add RFC into a real RFC. Is that something that might happen this week?
Right. It's possible, but not on the top of my priorities for the week. So maybe we'll just stay for next week.
Okay, keep it open. And then the last one was, I know Tierney, you've had the npm audit licenses PR open for a while, so I've been trying to push you and Roy together, or I'm been suggesting that you and Roy should get together at some point to help kick things off there, or anybody from our team to support that. So I'll keep those on. Since I don't think that you've gotten a chance to work on that yet, I'll keep those on the radar for next week as well. So cool. Let's move on then to the actual first actual RFC, issue 398. Roy, this is the top level command to manage package JSON. I don't think we've talked about this yet. So would you like to give a quick synopsis of what this is?
Sure. Yeah. I believe you floated the idea a few times already. So yeah, this is basically a command to kind of like centralize all the management of the package JSON in a single top level command. So right now we have a bunch of commands that already manage your package JSON data for you, like npm install, uninstall, right? They will all make sure to manage the dependencies. So recently, we introduced set script. It was one of the old, more old accepted RFCs. Was implemented by someone in the community, so we were happy. We shipped that in npm 7, but we also kind of wanted to think moving forward a way to kind of handle the rest of it, right? Like, so there's a way of managing the scripts, the way of managing dependencies. To some extent, we're also managing workspaces now with npm init using a workspace configuration. You will also automatically add workspaces entries to your workspaces configuration. So yeah, so this is basically a top level command to kind of centralize all the rest. And yeah, I believe there's a bunch to be discussed here, especially on the syntax. This is very raw, just the raw idea. You don't have too much in there in terms of implementation ideas yet. So I basically just throw an example using like npm pkg set script, and then you would set a key and a value because it is expected to be an object. So I believe that is some of the things I want to make sure we develop before opening the actual RFC.
Yeah,
So
I think Isaac's suggestion was the right one. Go ahead.
I just posted a suggestion there, and basically mirror what we can do with npm config, get, set, and delete. So npm pkg set will take a dot separated key and then an equal sign and a value, all as one positional argument. So you can set multiple things all in one command invocation. npm pkg get can take one or more keys, which can again be dot separated values. And we just dump the JSON stringified value. And npm pkg delete which can get, one or more dot separated keys, and we just delete those fields. So if you try to set something in a dot separated key, and one of the things along that path is not an object, then it exists and is not an object, then it'll throw an error. Otherwise, it'll just go ahead and create that object there.
How does what NPM supports here, because I haven't played with it that much for nested stuff with NPM config, how does it compare to git config's options?
Well, so right now, NPM config doesn't support any dot separated fields, but only because our config is a flat object, right? So it's like forced to be a flat object. So
could we mirror git config here? Because they have there's a lot of useful commands where you can pass a pattern and it'll print out everything that matches the pattern and stuff like that.
I mean, I have no objection to doing that for NPM config, but I don't know how.
Oh, I don't mean for NPM config. I meant for the package JSON stuff.
Right. How many fields do you have in your package JSON that you need to use a pattern to match them?
So personally, not that many. There's probably 20 fields in my biggest ones, but more like when I'm browsing, just trying to see what's there, then I could, or if I'm in a workspace and I do, whatever I haven't memorized the NPM workspaces equivalent yet, but whatever the equivalent is of learn it exec, NPM show me all the things in package JSON that match this pattern. There's a lot of convenience factors there.
Right. So I might want to say, show me anything
that has contributors.author or something. I don't know,
right.
Or funding.url or, as an example.
Well, NPM PKG, we would have to talk about what PKG-WS would do, right? Would that be setting in all of my workspaces, which could actually be really handy. If I want to set all of my workspaces linters to the same command,
100%. That's what this is great for, I think. Gar, I see you've had your hand up. Did you want to jump in?
Part of this address is just worried about deep objects, and the dot notation solves that. But when you bring up config, it reminds me we do have, now they're deprecated, but we do have config items with dots in them. So
that's why they're deprecated.
That's a whole can of worms. But I think as long as it matches what NPM View does now, the whole dot thing is a tangential bug and not a blocker. So that was my input after all the discussion happened, after I raised my hand.
Yeah, I would say let's match whatever, NPM View does, NPM config does. And then in terms of pattern matching, I don't have any opinion, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, that was why I brought up Git, because their decisions might be something to follow, in the sense that I think they have a lot more abilities to get multiple things than to set multiple things. And I suspect that we may end up coming to a similar conclusion about the footgun nature of setting multiple things. But at the least, if we're going to deviate, it seems worth doing that intentionally. So I think it would be nice as part of this RC if we kind of audit git configs commands here, and then decide evaluate how well they would work for the package JSON stuff.
True. I guess I'm basing my assumptions on how we can move forward quickly based on what we already have implemented in Vue and in config, right? So doing it's almost taking 2 steps back by going, what does Git do and how can we map to that when we've already when we've already implemented something some way? Why don't we just match what we're doing in those other commands, right?
Yeah, and I'm not speaking to the implementation or to the exact spelling of commands or the exact incantations, more just what are the capabilities git config has? Are those capabilities that we can or should match? Should we exceed them? Should we not? But yeah, I see your point for the rest of it.
Yeah, we could start simple. I imagine we could make this very verbose. Vue, I think, has a lot of options in terms of how you can actually write the syntax for pulling out keys, pulling out information from.
Yeah, I guess the other thing to pay attention to for perhaps inspiration is JQ.
Right, and that's like going very far, like very, yeah.
But like I'm sort of trying to advocate not redesigning a solved problem, even if, you know, because there's probably a lot of edge cases that we would dodge by mirroring the choices that others have already made for decades.
I mean, we also, you could do a lot worse than just to say that like npm pkg roughly mirrors what npm view and npm config already do.
That's kind of what I lean towards. Let's just like let's stay consistent with those two, and then yeah, then we don't have to have like the larger conversation of like net new like getters. So based on that, like, would we be okay with the suggestion that you brought up, Isaac? Does that align with what Vue does today? I think you just did dot notation, right?
Yeah, Vue supports that.
I mean, are we okay with then moving forward with turning this into an RFC?
Sure.
I would love to see this, like specifically because of the more complex workflows that we're trying to support with workspaces. I think it makes a ton of sense for you to be able to quickly, you know, set something in across all of your workspaces, right?
Well, and I mean, I can also imagine, let's say I wanted the same funding field on 300 different folders that I all have in the same container folder. And maybe I wanted to run a command that grabbed the output of a field using this from one package and then set it in all the others, you know, piping it across. Like that may be something I would be interested
in. Maybe, just maybe. Tierney, go ahead.
I've also been doing some just basic articles on ESM this week, and one thing that would be nice is to be able to go through and set type module on all my packages and like see what breaks. Or like, you know, if I want to switch from some ESLint config, I don't know, from Airbnb to something like standard, you know, that's an easy way to change. Well, would you be able to change a command, or is this just adding something new?
No, this would be also setting. So this would take over. What we would essentially do is like set script would probably under the hood map to this now. And then we would put like a deprecation notice for probably V8 for set script because it's essentially redundant. And yeah, so you'd be able to, for any scripts, you'd be able to do pkg set and then.
No, this sounds super useful. Like I can also, I mean, I have worked with enough different Microsoft teams that manage large swaths of modules, whether they're internal usage or external usage, that would, like, you know, I worked with Brian Turleson on some stuff a while ago of like, hey, we want to update all this like one line in every single package here. Good luck. Like it becomes nasty. So this is fucking great. Like this is excellent. I'm very excited for this.
Cool. So unless folks have any other comments on this, we'll queue up an action item to turn this into RFC.
Awesome.
Cool. Moving on then to number 390, npm publish should fail when files are misconfigured in package.json or missing in the config for package.json. I don't think Aladdin was able to join, but I think just a high level overview of what the ask here is and the RFC is if you've defined a files array, a bunch of files in package.json, and you go to do a publish, if those files don't exist, their hope is that we should be erroring out, or we should be throwing an error when you go to essentially pack. Thoughts, feelings? I'll share the link.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if you've explicitly put an item in an include list, and that include list isn't a shareable list, like a shared config or something extended from somewhere else, then you would always want an error when that inclusion, like when the thing you're trying to include is missing. And I think this meets all those criteria.
Tony, do you still have your hand up? Or
No, sorry.
yeah, I think the
That's
problem.
That's going to be we should make it a warning. It's a breaking change if it's an error.
Yeah, I was going to say it is a breaking change, but you could potentially do something similar to what we have with engine strict. So we could be like file strict. So we could make it a warning by default, and that wouldn't be a breaking change. We could ship that in a minor, but then if you want to error out, maybe we could put it behind a flag. So like npm publish could have like a flag, something along the lines of like files strict or something. Files list strict.
Could it be just made an error in the next major though, as well?
Right, but if
Yeah,
somebody
sure.
wanted it today and then we drop the flag in the make it.
Typically we'll do that with a flag that defaults to current behavior, and then we just change the default in the next sender.
And
The
drop that
easiest
config.
the easiest way to kind of user test this is we ship it as a warning, and then we look at what people complain about. So people will either complain that the warning exists, or they'll complain that the warning is not stopping the publishing from happening. And there's our answer.
Cool. Does that make sense, Jordan? Are you kind of okay with that approach? We can make
Yeah,
the
it makes perfect
recommendation.
sense.
Cool. Okay, so maybe we can give the feedback. We'll backlog the work to make this a warning by default, and then like we're okay with in V8 like shipping it as an error.
So just getting into the weeds a little bit on this of like when we put that warning in place. It's ever so slightly tricky because your files list can be something like lib, and there's nothing in the npm pack list called lib. Instead, I have lib/blah.js, right? Because lib is a folder. So when we check to see if everything in the files list match something, we have to also actually see if there's anything in the files list which matches, if there's anything in the npm pack list which matches something that's in the files list. Also, the files list can be globs. So
yeah, so that I was going to say that if it's a directory, it seems easy, right? Like it's that there
Anything
must be at
starts
least
with it,
one file
yeah.
in the directory, or it warrants. But when there's a star, the semantics of star are 0 or more, like universally. So it kind of seems like that shouldn't warn.
It gets extra weird too, right? Because if you have something in your files list that has like a brace comma section, right? So if I have my files is lib/open curly brace foo comma bar close curly brace. Well, what if I got foo but I didn't get bar, right? And the expansion of that glob says specifically, no, there are two things here. It's not 0 or more. It's both of these.
It's an or, right? Or it could be like
from an inclusion point of view, effectively it is an or, but from a glob expansion semantics point of view, it's and. Like if you echo that
but
glob,
like,
it will
I think the
echo both
brace
things.
expansion, there's a difference between the star and not, right? Because if there's stars in there, then 0 is acceptable. But brace expansion alone is not a star. So if you just had lib/curly brace foo comma bar curly brace, that's 2 items. That's just a shorthand for 2 explicit strings in your list. And so I would expect that to error if either one was missing.
Right, but this gets very quickly like mind-bogglingly complicated unless we say that everything in every glob in the files list has to match either the parent directory or a file in the pack list.
You'd be able to pretty quickly figure that out though, like you're saying, from the parent, right? Like
But what I'm saying is that if I put foo/star in my files list,
Yeah.
nothing in foo is an acceptable outcome,
What about
right?
if
Like
you
I'm saying
did,
that the star is, it means that 0 is okay. That's how star works, like everywhere.
right? So what if I have like, I mean, brace expansions get pretty complicated. There's also like question marks, there's stars, there's, the at section things, the plus section things. Like we support the full breadth of bash 4 style globs.
Like brace expansion is different than a glob, isn't it? Like the glob is only a star. It's not a glob if it's just brace expansion. And expansion is like a list should be normalized and expand all the expansions before being checked. And then the normalized list would have nothing
Right.
in it
So-
but globs and non-globs. And the non-globs would error if they were, or warn if they were missing. And the globs would allow missing items.
There's two different, you're mixing two different semantics. The first one is brace expansion as it's done by bash on the command line. But what the glob semantics that files lists and ignore files use is more in line with how git ignores work. So brace expansion effectively is just used to say, does this particular file I'm looking at match any of the things in this brace expanded list? And then you're right. I mean, in a strictly technical point of view, brace expansion is separate and happens prior to globs, which is why if you dig into the implement details of Minimatch and Node Glob, they actually separate out brace expansion prior to doing the globs on all of the path parts, because true glob sections can't include slashes, whereas brace expansion can.
I guess to me, like I mean, I hear that that's a model, a mental model, but like when I type brace expansion in my command line, that is just a shortcut for me typing two things or multiple
Right,
things.
that's
right?
how the shell does
So
it. But that's not how git ignore does it. So if we wanted to say, well,
I
I
see.
shouldn't, if we wanted to say like, which files does this particular entry in my files list, which files on disk does this refer to? Like that entry was satisfied because there's something that satisfies it. Like the simple way
is there
to do
a
is
difference though between those semantics? Like if git treated it as like, let's expand it to a list of files and then see if it matches, would that make a difference?
well, git doesn't warn you if there's something in your git ignore that doesn't exist, right? So it's
Right.
like what we're talking about adding is kind of a net new functionality that lists on this. So we'd have to figure out exactly what those semantics mean.
Just to be mindful, Gar, I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, just two things. A point, historically, we've been very bad at even doing it in the first place and then doing it poorly, where we try and guess the user's intent, which sounds like what we're talking about here. Second, the files entry is kind of a inversion of an original intent as far as using glob. Glob is designed for git ignore, where it's fine if nothing matches. The git ignore is like, hey, if these swap files exist, don't worry about them, right? I don't expect them to exist. Files, I think based on this PR, is saying, I expect these things to be here, which wasn't really the original intent of glob. So that we've got a kind of a square peg round hole problem here. So that's, I think, why the implementation's tricky, is because glob solved a different problem. And so now trying to make it solve the inverse problem is not intuitive. So I would just say, let's be very careful if we go forward with this, that we're not guessing the user's intent. And
Also,
that maybe we just think hard about, is this something we can correctly implement in a way that we're not guessing what the user wanted?
there is, I mean, I somewhat disagree with you. Like the implementation of glob as it's used in ignore files definitely is exactly what you're saying. Like if the file doesn't exist, then great. Like I should pretend it doesn't exist. But the implementation as it is now in npm packlist is actually quite different. When it encounters a directory with a package JSON, it basically replaces its read file, its readdir call as it's doing that exploration. it replaces its redir call with expand all of these globs. And those are the things that I'm going to kind of view on the next pass. And if they're directories, then I'll continue reading through them.
Yeah, I just want to be mindful of time.
We could, there are options we could pass to node glob, which would tell us, like, did anything match? And if there isn't anything that matches, we could track that somehow and you know, include them in the pack list as like, hey, this thing didn't match anything. I would probably want to say though that like the way that we make this work is we say every files list, everything in the files list, brace expansion or glob or true glob or what have you, has to match at least one thing. Otherwise there's a problem.
So just to time box things, we only have about 15 minutes left.
Okay.
I would encourage everybody that had opinions there to add some comments back to the RFC itself. And also if we can capture, not just in the meeting notes, but maybe also give a sense of what we could do in terms of action items moving forward, in terms of throwing a warning. And then potentially in V8 throwing an actual error. I think that would be great to capture that. But yeah, encourage folks to keep the conversation going in the async and the issue itself. Want to move on. I had here originally in the agenda, there was a item there for defining shared versus not shared depths, which we dropped the agenda label last week. So just to tell folks that I updated that, removed that from the agenda. And moving on then to the PR 343. This is the auto switching context based on current working directory. I want to get to this and potentially the next RFC specifically. So if we can time box this to about 5 minutes, that'd be great. Roy, I'm not sure if there's anything to update here. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I mean, there were, I think, 2 comments there. Pretty good. Someone basically suggesting that maybe we can just warn a message or something, telling the user, well, you should just run this command from the top level using the workspace config. That is a valid alternative, I think, to kind of improve on the problem. And yeah, and this other person commented on it saying, basically, like a very custom setup where you might have nested workspaces, and it will be a shame if we were to break that. I think Jordan or someone else might have alluded to that in the previous discussions on this RFC. So yeah, I think to sum up, Darcy, I know you mentioned we probably should clean up and update the RFC, but I kind of, I want to make sure we capture the sentiment here, which I believe is we add a new configuration option, right? That we have to kind of manually point to workspace root. So we could either put that into an npm RFC file, or one of the suggestions that I personally like is maybe just reading from the package JSON. We already made the workspaces configuration. We made it accept an object so that we could eventually in the future add more properties there, like no hoist, right? No hoist we are not supporting currently, but maybe we could just put the root, workspace root under the workspaces configuration of each child if we want. I think is also.
Yeah.
So are those the 2 options in your
there's a third option which might be worth considering. It's a little more magical, but it might be better, which is like when we reify and there's a workspace there, we put something in the workspace node modules folder, which indicates the root.
It's really the 4th option, right? Like there's the original option, which is to walk. And
yeah, that's a bad
we agree
idea.
that's okay. I just want to make sure that we're saying That's an option.
sure.
We agree.
Sure.
We don't want to go with that option because it's a bad idea. Now you're saying the other kind of magical option could be, well, we could nest a file or something in node modules, right? To walk the up the tree. Yeah. Okay. No. I would. Okay. So folks on the call, if you were given those, I would not personally. I don't like that option of the magical node modules. I'd rather it be somewhere like either an npm RC file or the package JSON, as Roy's just identified. I consider those to be the two options that I think are personally more appetizing.
Yeah, and the option, yeah, with that option sounds, maybe it's a little bit problematic, right? Because if it is going to automatically put something in the node modules, then it's essentially the same as just walking up the tree and
well, no, it's not, because in order to put something in your node modules tree, like you have to take some action. You have to reify at the root of the project, right? So when I run npm install in my workspace root, it'll add that workspace root link to all the workspace children.
Right.
And then if I then cd into that folder, well, the link is there. So
So
it's,
I guess why I don't consider that to be as appetizing is just it's another file we have to ignore, or potentially like if you're like versus the npm RC file. I guess for me, the npm RC file seems to be the most natural fit for this kind of configuration.
Well, and I for what we've talked about, there's like the two mental models, right? One is I want my child workspace to always know it's part of a big workspace. But the other, which is one I tend to use more often, is I want my child workspace to act as if it were in a repo by itself. And so like putting it in npm RC gives me the ability to change that setting. And it also gives us the ability to pick the default we think most people will want.
Yeah, and I also think that if we put in package JSON, when you go to publish that package, now you've got this configuration that probably doesn't is not relevant to anybody, like this extra metadata that's like hanging out now in like the packment like metadata. It's like why?
Well, and it doesn't, package JSON makes sense to me for affecting like some commands, but like this is affecting like every npm command potentially, right? Like it's telling you whether you're in a workspace or not. And npm RC is usually the thing that tells npm things.
Yeah, npm, it's just funny because it works when you cd into that folder and try to run, right? But for all the purpose, that file is just ignored, right? So you might also become a source of confusion for, I don't know, what you.
So sorry, what I don't know what you're saying there, Roy. Like,
so let's say you have workspace A, workspace B, right, and you have the root. So if you place an npm RC file under workspace A, then you can you can set a bunch of options there if you want, right? Like you can copy the npm RC from the root and place there, but only add workspace root pointing to your project folder. But the thing is that, so users might dump a lot of config options there and just get confused later if they're executing a command from the project level, from the root level. And those configs don't apply because we are not reading npm RC files for workspaces, right? From when we are running from the project root level, we're not going to be parsing these files, at least not today.
So
right.
We have to the thing to decide here. I know Jordan is going to vote no. He's going to say no, I don't want that. But the thing to decide here is when I check out a workspace project and then I run npm install and then I cd into packages/foo and I run some other npm command, does it know that I'm in a workspace or not? Like how many steps have to happen in order for it to understand that the folder I'm in is actually not the npm prefix, it's a workspace? So putting walking up the tree satisfies that use case, right? Like there's no way that it can ever not know that I'm in a workspace because we're always going to find whatever workspace we're in. Unfortunately, it's too aggressive. It'll find that workspaces it shouldn't. If there's a indicator that we place in the workspace the first time we reify, like a link in node modules or something like that, then that is then you get that behavior, right? I run npm install in the root, and then I cd into a workspace, and I start doing stuff, and it knows I'm in a workspace.
That means when you run npm install in the child workspace for the first time, it can't know it's in a workspace.
Right. Well, there's no way that it ever possibly could, other than
Well, it could if it's an npm-rc and I cloned it from Git, which would never include the node modules, but would include the npm-rc.
I see. Well,
and
wait,
also
it's a workspace, but the
like storing things inside node
separate,
modules.
Hold on, it's a workspace,
Yeah,
but then the workspace is a separate repo.
No, I'm saying that I have a monorepo. I clone it for the first time. I immediately cd into a child workspace. I type npm install.
I see.
If
it was an npm-rc
install
file,
the whole workspace.
right?
Yeah,
If it was
with a committed npm-rc file or package.json field, it would work fine.
Right. So if you'd never done the root reify, then there would not be
right, which is the case for any fresh clone.
Right. If I cd into packages foo and then I run npm install, it's going to fetch every. Yeah, it won't know it's in a workspace. So it's not.
And that is usually, I think, what most monorepo users would do is cd into the one folder they care about.
Yeah,
but then I think it could be maybe in the package lock. Then it could be checked into the Git repo.
You're unlikely to check in the package lock from the workspaces, though. You'd put it in the root. So unless you're saying that we put it in the workspace package lock, like the package lock entry for each child workspace just says workspace root equals blah.
And then that only solves for things that have package locks. My monorepo case enzyme is a package. I don't include lock files in it. And I want to be able to use this functionality.
Well, you'd have to include those lock files.
So
you wouldn't have to include. It wouldn't be locking very much, though.
It would just, right?
Yeah. We could also put that npm-rc there by default.
That's what.
Right. That was my original
suggestion. Yeah.
Right.
The suggestion is npm init will add a new capability to create the npm-rc file if it doesn't exist already.
Well,
if npm init won't exist already, and
another possibility is that we place that .npm-rc file in the workspace children, in the workspace targets, if it's not present.
Well, that would be a new command
when
that would be under
when we
npm
reify,
workspaces.
When you run npm install in the root, we place it there, and then you would still get the not when you init the workspace, the first time you install the root project.
In other words, every child workspace would then always have an npm-rc file in it with this one setting. Anyone could override it if they wanted to, and if they didn't, that's fine. Like it's just a config file.
Yeah, but then I think it might be more elegant to just have workspaces, and a nested property in the package JSON of each workspace itself, right? And then it can just be workspaces and then root or workspace root, and then point into the.
Yeah, the downside of putting it in the package JSON is that we use that in other places, and you can't then override it. If it's not present.
It means you can't override it per command. It means you can't override it. Like it means you can't omit that information from the published package.
Yeah. Putting it in package JSON,
you can override it.
That leaks a lot of implementation in places I don't know if we really want it to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Like directory structure, there's no reason to, yeah. Okay. We only have a few minutes left. I want to maybe try to close this out to give us some, what do we want to go forward with? I personally am a proponent of all the suggestions Jordan made, including the npm workspaces. I think it was a link suggestion or something like that, or yeah.
I can definitely, if you want, Darcy, I think this might be a good solution. Like I can definitely revamp the RFC, add the suggestion of having the npm-rc file for now, for each nested workspace, and we can continue the conversation after it's the RFC itself is updated.
Okay. Yeah, this is definitely something we want to work on quickly, I think, though. That's why, like, it's good that we're having the conversation about how we're going to implement it, but like, something that I know people, like you said, are constantly coming up against. I also just got off a call with the folks from Create React App who have been using Yarn for a while, workspaces, and said that like Yarn's implementation is, I think, the initial conceptual model that you had, which was like the auto inferring root space, the roots workspace. So, or they have like a way to define it within the child as well. I think within, similar to what your second suggestion as well. So there's a way to essentially like create that connection. So, okay. We only have about a minute left, so we're not going to probably be able to get to the other item that I did want to get to, which is NILF's where config. I believe we're at the point that we want to ratify this. It's just the name is less than appetizing.
Yeah, name
anybody
is,
have? Yeah. Anybody have suggestions? My two suggestions were actually to break this out into two separate configs. One being config location and one being exec location, being extremely verbose and explicit.
So for exec, it's the package location.
Sure.
Right.
Exec is the, sure. Yes, package location. Correct. You're right. Okay, so we could call it package location and configuration location.
For config location, are we accepting paths or words that represent?
Right. That was where I was kind of waffling on that one too, because it should be a word that represents where that config would be, not a direct path.
Correct. So in both cases, I imagine it being words. Predefined set that we already know about.
And a num.
Yes, an enum. Are we okay with that recommendation? Can we update the RFC? Very explicit, very verbose. Nobody's going to make a mistake calling it where. If there's no pushback, no, if you've got any time, which I don't know if you do, because I know you've got a chock full day, maybe we can move forward on this later in the week. Update it. Okay.
Yep, I'll get it updated.
Awesome. Cool. We're over time now. Apologize for any folks that came for any of the topics that we had towards the end of the agenda. Hopefully we'll get to those next week. And yeah, thank you all for jumping on today. And hopefully we can keep the conversation going async, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.
Sounds good.
Bye.